Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, joining us in these very valuable and also outstanding sessions about Middle Eastern issues. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Nostalgiawan Wahyudi. I'm become your moderator for these sessions, and also I am a researcher at the Indonesian Institute of Science, or Lembaga Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia, commonly known as LIPI. You know LIPI better than me. Actually, LIPI, one of the biggest research institutions in Indonesia, owned and funded by our government. And in this event, we are the partner of FPCI to talk about the Middle Eastern issues in this forum. Actually, at LIPI, I will give you some information about. We have a Middle Eastern research group who have done research for more than 15 years. And currently, we have done research on Arab Spring issues for more than 15 countries in the world. And currently, we want to talk about the issue of Middle Eastern politics in the Middle East. And also, I will give you some finding in our research for Middle Eastern politics. But it is only 3 findings, actually, that in my understanding related to discussion today. First, we found that there is the failure of Arab Spring. We call it the concept of backward bending process. It means the failure of democratization process and the return of Middle East into new authoritarian system. The wave of Arab Spring has fruitfully seeded democracy at nowhere in the Middle East, except in a state where the Arab Spring started. That is Tunisia, the only state. We illustrate, for the second point, we illustrate that the political attitude among major power in the Middle East as democratic silence during Arab Spring. Democracy is not seriously engineered by major power in the regions, but the major power involvement in the regions reflect their political experimentations to maintain power, interest, and also influence. For the third findings, we found that the Muslim Brotherhood was the most reactive and also the most defeated political Islam in the Middle East. This is our research finding that related to our discussion today, although we have several findings also that might not directly related today. And we know that Middle East is very dynamic regions. There is no Middle East without change. After we have very dramatic phenomenon called Arab Spring, a hope for democratic transition in the Middle East. But at the end, we have to realize that we are directed into new political puzzle and messy conflict in the region. We have conflict at Syria with deep major power involvement and rivalries between United States and also Russia. And we also have conflict at Yemen with the involvement of Saudi Arabia and also Iran. We also have conflict at Libya after the dawn of Gaddafi. We have also conflict in Saudi Arabia, diplomatic blockade toward Qatar. You can imagine this kind of messy conflict in the Middle East. Shall we call this biggest messy conflict and also rivalry in the Middle East as a new phenomenon of the Middle Eastern Cold War? It can be. But we will answer all these questions today in our discussions. Okay, from the side, I will give you some questions directly. I want to hear your voice and also your views. This is like hands up questions. Just raise your hand. Who will be the winner in the Middle East Cold War? Iran or Saudi Arabia? We choose for Iran. Okay. Only this side, only this side. And who choose for Saudi Arabia? Oh, I think we have a lot of Saudi Arabia's followers here, but we have Iranian ambassador here. I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. From this side, relative the same questions. Who will be the winner in the Middle Eastern Cold War? United States or Russia? We choose for United States. Oh, no one want to choose? Only 3 people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only 5. We choose for Russia. I don't want to say that we have Russian follower here. Okay. To answer all these questions, at this forum we have 4 speakers already. And please join me welcoming our speakers. For the first speakers, Ambassador of Islamic Republic of Iran, His Excellency Ambassador Muhammad Qaus Haikal Azad. Please come on stage. Give one applause to him. Our second speakers, have a seat here. Ambassador of the State of the Palestine to Indonesia, His Excellency Ambassador Zuhair Al-Sun. Please have a seat. For the third speaker, we have the former chairperson of Muhammadiyah and the chairman of CDCC, Center for Dialogue and Cooperation Among Civilizations, Kiai Haji Professor Dr. Din Samsudin. And the fourth speaker, we have the head of Asia Pacific Program, Chatham House, UK, Dr. Champa Patel. Please come on stage. Please give one warm applause to all speakers today. Okay, in this session we have in-depth interview discussions, but this is not very formal. And I will give directly question to first His Excellency Ambassador Muhammad Qaus, the Ambassador of Islamic Republic of Iran. Maybe it is some direct question, His Excellency. First, what do you think and what will you do if one day United States give up or take off their troops from Syria? Please get an answer.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Pasti saya tidak takut. Very good question. Because I have focused my introduction concerning the United States in Middle East.
Yeah.
And you have changed the design of the question and answer or a kind of interview. So, by the way, as I see, there is several points that I think is better to be considered in global and regional level analysis. The name of the conference is Hot Peace, and somehow is referring to no Cold War. I think it's not correct to have the name of no Cold War. Cold War is two superpowers and the imperatives of such a system. But now we are in a new system that they call it, a kind of unipolarity, in polarity system, or they say polycentric system. And also there is regiopolarity. But the point is that, we have one superpower and many powers in the polarity that we have to consider well. The point is when we come to the global level analysis, we find out that there is something happening in Asia. There is the rise of China. When you see the GDP based on PPP of China, you can understand that it is $21 trillion. when you come to the GDP based on PPP of United States, it is $18 trillion. And when it comes to Russia, it is 3. So it looks like that from the point of view of economic situation, you can see the differences of the major powers. Somebody say that 21st century is the century of Asia, the century of China. So besides China rise, we have also a big challenges, big developments in Asia. You know, up to 2030, there will be half of Middle East, people in Asia, a big market, a big development there. So the point is that we have to consider the, major rivalry in United States and China. And in the regional level, we can see that in East Asia, we have the rise of the rest, it means Asia. And here at the regional level, we have also China. And some parts we have a big institution here, ASEAN. As Mrs. Retno was mentioning, 10% of the share of the economy of all this with you, ASEAN. So there is hope. She was mentioning about hope. When we come to the Middle East, we have a history of behaviors by the United States that it was after 1945, there was, a kind of moves against Soviet Union, Cold War, and also there was some uprisings by Arab people, countries. They call it nationalism by Arabs. So they were going to tackle that. And after then, we have seen that the collapse of Soviet Union, and then it was raising the new world order by Bush, the father. And after then, they tried to have such this system in the world, but they cannot do that. So it comes to the new, let's say, a kind of attacks by terrorism, by Al-Qaeda in the region, in the Middle East. So they have focused a lot war against terror. It was in Middle East. So they focused on this matter. And also there was something happening in the Middle East after, we can say uprising, or as they say, Islamic Revolution in Iran. So there was a new power in the region. So it looks like
Can we directly to discuss about Syrian problem and what happened if the United States take off their troops from Syria, and what is your opinion as ambassador of Iran?
Yeah, when you consider this global and regional level analysis, you find out that, it looks like that the United States, even though Middle East is very important for United States, but they are going to leave to East Asia. And during different, recently Obama administration up to now, they are doing that, of course, with different tactics in these two administrations. So when you consider the more important developments in East Asia, I think that they are going to live here, but they are going to have the burden of security activities by the countries in the region. Previously, surely you remember, during Carter time, there was a task force which was paid by the United States. But now they say that, the situation in United States is very important in global level that I forgot to explain, is the relative decline of the United States. You know, China is ahead, United States is in relative decline. So they have to find out something to manage such this situation. They have to have the stakeholders in the Middle East to pay for their security, and also in East Asia to have their competition, economic competition with China. So through that, they can manage and to have their power at a level that they can have the leadership in 21st century. Otherwise, the story will be something else.
Okay, can we come to next questions? Is Saudi Arabia become your major enemy in the Middle East? Is your friction with Saudi Arabia related to Sunni Shia proxies in the regions?
You were giving a kind of vote now, and so I was defeated. I mean, Iran was defeated by the audience, but I think it's a kind of misunderstanding. You know, a new developments, when you see there is a kind of positive signals from the Arab countries, even though from Saudi Arabia. And it looks like that, you know, somehow I think I will vote for both. Iran and Saudi Arabia will win, because they are the major power in the Middle East. I remember it during Obama administration. It was a dual engagement designed by him. You know, he was gathering all Arab countries in Camp David. Camp David usually was discussing about Palestine, but changed to talking Iran, Saudi Arabia. So it means that, you know, it's the big developments in the area. So it must be managed. And also in continuous administration, I think is going to have it. But somehow when there is going to have a rapprochement between Iran and with the Arab brother countries, you see somehow there is some meddling and some powers coming to the scene and make trouble. That's the point that the history of relation in the Middle East shows that we have to be careful about these meddlers. Who are they? And after then we can vote.
I see. For next question, His Excellency Ambassador Joel Alsum, do you still have a hope for the future of Palestine after the relocation of the U.S. Embassy to the city of Jerusalem?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Actually, I am going to give my answer in Arabic, and my translator, he will give directly to you. القضية الفلسطينية قضية عريقة، قضية طويلة عشتموها وتعيشونها حتى الآن. القضية الفلسطينية لا يمكن اختزالها في 3 دقائق أو 5 دقائق. القضية الفلسطينية عانت منذ أكثر من 100 عام وما زالت تعاني بسبب سياسة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي واستهداف هذه الأرض المقدسة. فلسطين لها مكانة عظيمة في العالم، ولهذا السبب استهدفت هذه الأرض وهذه البقعة الجغرافية الصغيرة. التضحيات الجسام التي حصلت والتي دفع العديد من القيادات الفلسطينية ومن الشعب الفلسطيني من أجل هذه القضية العادلة لن تذهب إلا بتحقيق العدل والمساواة والإنصاف لهذا الشعب. الشعب هو صاحب القرار. الشعب الفلسطيني هو الذي يقرر. ترامب لا يمكن لا للرئيس الأمريكي ولا غير الرئيس الأمريكي أن يحدد المسار للشعب الفلسطيني. الشعب الفلسطيني صاحب الإرادة، صاحب القوة، هو الذي يتحكم في المعادلة، وهو الرقم الصعب في هذه المنطقة كما قالها الزعيم الراحل ياسر عرفات. السفارة الأمريكية في القدس، القدس خط أحمر. القدس بالنسبة لنا الموت أو الحياة. لا يمكن أن نقبل بأي معادلة تغير من مكانة القدس بالنسبة للشعب الفلسطيني. هو قرر نقل السفارة، نقل حجارة إلى هذا المكان، لكن هذه الحجارة سنحطمها، ستزول كما زال حائط برلين وانهارت إمبراطوريات كثيرة في هذا العالم. الإدارة الأمريكية أخطأت، والرئيس ترامب أخطأ عندما تحدى إرادة الشعب الفلسطيني. ولذلك الإدارة الأمريكية للأسف أقول لكم أنها هي الخاسرة، وإسرائيل في مأزق. ولذلك القرار الأمريكي هو قرار ليس لديه شرعية، ليس لديه قانون، ليس لديه إرادة دولية. العالم كله رفض هذه القرارات. هناك دولة واحدة وافقت أمريكا، هي غوانتيمالا، للأسف. لكن أقول لكم أن المسألة ليست بنقل السفارة إلى القدس أو غيرها والاعتراف بالقدس. الشعب الفلسطيني هو صاحب الإرادة، وهو الذي سوف يقرر هذا الموقف الحاسم.
All right. The Palestinian issue is considered the hottest issue in the world, and it has the very complex and very long history. And talking about the Palestinian issue, it's definitely not sufficient to have the time only 5 to 7 minutes. We actually need very long time to talk about the Palestinian issue. As we all know, the Palestinian people have been suffering for this Israeli occupation for more than 70 years. But then His Excellency said more than 150 years. So talking about the relocation or the recognition of the U.S. under the Trump administration towards the city of Jerusalem as the capital of the Israel, His Excellency said it is the absolute right of Palestinian people to decide. It is not the right of Trump in his position as the President of the United States of America to decide and to give the right of the Palestinian people to Israel. So this is the matter of the days. As the time passes by, the time will answer the right of the Palestinian people. And unfortunately, the current U.S. administration has committed another diplomatic volley through its pro-Israeli policy, which culminates in its recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the transfer of its embassy to it, and the closure of the PLO office in Washington. And this U.S. policy under the Trump administration, which then surprised us, contradicts the resolutions of international legitimacy, international law, as well as humanitarian law.
Okay, for second question, His Excellency, do you still have optimism about Saudi's new leadership outlook or new pragmatic foreign policy of Saudi toward Palestine?
المملكة العربية السعودية يعني لها موقف واضح من القضية الفلسطينية، وشبيهة بإندونيسيا ودول العالم التي تؤيد القضية الفلسطينية. نحن الذين نغير المعادلة كما قلت. العالم كله يقف إلى عدالة هذه القضية الفلسطينية. فقط أمريكا وإسرائيل هما المعاديان للقضية الفلسطينية. هناك بعض الأصوات البعيدة ولكن ليست مؤثرة، لكن أمريكا هي المؤثرة وإسرائيل التي تتعارض مع هذا. السعودية لها مواقف جيدة من القضية الفلسطينية، ونحن نحترم القيادة السعودية ونحترم هذا الموقف السعودي الذي يؤيد القضية الفلسطينية ويقدم الدعم كباقي الدول العربية والإسلامية ودول العالم وأحرار العالم التي تساعد القضية الفلسطينية. لا يوجد خلاف بيننا وبين المملكة العربية السعودية.
Saudi Arabia has actually a very clear stance on the Palestinian issues, just like the Indonesia, in the level of government and also the level of people. So there is no actually disputes between what the policy that Saudi is making. Actually, talking about the Palestinian issue, what countries support the Palestinian issue and what countries against the issue? The countries that against the Palestinian people is actually only the United States and Israel. If we try to be objective, actually all countries all over the world, they are supporting the Palestinian people. Means they are supporting the Palestinian issue. Only then these United States of America and Israel are allies and have a very clear stance on against Palestinian people. So we here wants to appreciate whatever Saudi government has done for the Palestinian people.
For Professor Dr. Din Samsudin, okay, how you explained the Middle East conflict in the Indonesian perspective? What is Indonesian strategic approach to cool off the situation in Middle East, in your opinion?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. To me, moderator's questions sounds provocative and partly nostalgic because his name is Nostalgiawan. I would like indeed to respond to your initial questions before the session regarding who will be the winners. I hold on to my belief that at the end of the day, all will be losers. Only the peace and justice loving people will be the winners. I will base my answer on the scientific tendencies. I hold on to my belief in this era of conflict, tension among nations, and there is a tendency now in the world of convergence and the emphasis on dialogue and cooperation among religions, among civilizations, and this tendency will pave the way at the end to peace and justice. And therefore, the current situation in the Middle East and also in North Africa or MENA region, the Arab Spring, the sounds seemingly rivalry between nations, especially as you mentioned, Iran and Saudi Arabia and others, are indeed impact from the presence of the foreign powers. So I think the immediate withdrawal of foreign powers, major powers in the region, will then provide situations of dialogue. Of course, many nations in the region have differences, but I do believe they share also commonalities. And therefore, the involvement of foreign powers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in North Syria, Yemen, and many others are temporary situations. And this is an opportunity for Indonesia, as you asked me, because by nature, Indonesia possesses the middle path, whether relating to Pancasila and our 1945 Constitution, and also our tendency and influence very much on the Indonesian foreign policy. But my criticisms that Indonesia has not yet performed itself as the middle way, the middle path power, as stipulated and imperative from our constitution. And therefore, I think we need in the future high diplomacy from Indonesia, especially through the mechanisms of OIC conferences. Indonesia could lead and could take initiative for peacekeeper in the region.
Okay, as we know that Indonesia has very minimum foreign policy toward Middle East. In your opinion, is Indonesia capable to take major role to solve the problem in the Middle East?
Yeah, it should take the decisive role through the mechanism of OIC, but unfortunately OIC sometimes is called OIC. So we need to, encourage this institution of Muslim countries to be more active, especially to solve the internal problem within the OIC countries, especially in the Middle East. And Indonesia, once again, needs to perform itself as a mediator, maybe together with other Muslim countries, OIC members, I don't know, maybe Turkey, Pakistan, and some countries in North Africa, for example, to be, leading factor, leading unit to initiate the new development within the OIC countries, especially to solve the problem in the Middle Eastern region.
Okay, thank you very much. For Dr. Champa Patel, we have some question for you. To what extent does the major power rivalry play a part in directing the conflict in the Middle East?
So I think when we talk about major power rivalries, we have to break that down a little bit. Yeah. So if you look at that through a security, military lens, then clearly you're looking at competition between Russia and the US. But if you broaden that and take as the Iranian ambassador was saying, a more economic lens, then you see a multitude of different actors. Sorry, from a security lens, you could also add Turkey to that as well. So I think what you have is this element of security competition, militarized competition, where you have actors like the US, Russia, and Turkey. But you also have an economic transactionalism, where you have countries like China, Japan, and others who are engaging with the region from a more economic perspective. So they are major powers, they are engaging in the Middle East, but they are not necessarily engaging in the conflicts of the Middle East. So I think the question then is, should those actors be taking a more proactive role in trying to resolve some of these conflicts? As you said, Indonesia could have a role to play, but should China be playing a bigger role? And I think the challenge with that is that it's highly unlikely that China will want to position itself in that way in the Middle East. China's interest in the Middle East is primarily economic. It's related to energy, trade and investment, infrastructure. The Arab Gulf accounts for 40% of all of China's oil imports. So I think for China, what it does is it looks at what's happening, it looks at US engagement in the Middle East, and it thinks that we don't want the wars without end. We don't want to get involved in messy, complex, intrastate disputes where it's not clear what the outcome is. And I think, China's very badly burned by what happened in Libya, where they voted through the United Nations Security Council for a no-fly zone. And then, obviously what happened with Gaddafi. So I think for them, what they want to do is try and stay out of the fray. What I hear from colleagues who work on the Middle East is, at some point, China will have to choose. But I would caution against seeing emerging powers, like China's not an emerging power, it is an established power. But I would caution against seeing Indonesia or India or China in the same way that we understand Western powers. And the reason that I say that is, China will not behave like the UK or the US. It doesn't have an ally system. It's much more transactional in its approach, and it will hedge. It will refuse to make a choice because it will not see the benefits of choosing. And I think on the other side, Saudi Arabia and other countries think they can force China to make a choice. So if you look at the dispute with Qatar, China didn't take part. It worked with all parties. And China won't take part in those kind of tensions between different countries. So I think, if you're Saudi Arabia, you're used to, no matter what you do, no matter how your human rights violations, financing of Islamist terrorism, no matter what's done, the Western allies stand by Saudi Arabia. So it thinks, well, China needs our oil, so we have a quid pro quo that we can leverage on China. But the reality is China has options. It relies on the Arab Gulf for oil, but it's also diversifying. It's looking at Venezuela, it's looking at other oil markets. So I think the reality is that we need a new way of understanding Asian powers' engagement in the Middle East, because it's not going to look like the Western powers, and actually they will play a very limited role in trying to resolve conflict.
Okay, with your explanation, we know that there is new involvement of major power in the Middle East, like China and also Russia. Do you think that the US still capable to become the sole power in the region?
I don't think the US is the sole power now, because I think what you have is competing interests playing out in the Middle East. But you have to remember, if you're a country like China, it actually works to your benefit to have the US as the security actor, because you're not taking on those costs, right? So the only thing China needs to do is protect its investments and its diaspora, its staff in the Middle East. So in some respects, China can position itself as a neutral actor. It can position itself as, not somebody who's involved in wars, not somebody who creates conflict, because they have the US to point to. So I think in some ways it suits Chinese foreign policy to have the US be seen as the security actor, and then they're seen as the good guys who help on development and more on the economic side. So I wouldn't say the US is the sole superpower. I think it has a strong security imprint that is historical as well as contemporary. But it has competition, and I don't think the US knows how to engage with the resurgent Russia. I don't think it knows how to deal with how China engages in the region. So I think, it's a multipolar world where everybody is still trying to figure each other out, because the days of the old hegemonies are gone. And I think with the US, we talk about the Trump administration like it's an aberration. And once he's gone, if he goes, you can go back to business as usual. But I would argue that, China is not going to become not a superpower. India is going to become an emerging power, is an emerging power now. Indonesia is an emerging power. You can't go back. So this new messy world of multipolarity, I think we are all still trying to figure out what that means, because we don't know. And it's not going to mean that Asian powers act in the same way the Western powers did. I think we are looking at a completely new landscape, and we don't necessarily have the tools to understand what that will look like.
Okay, for the ambassador of Iran, we have very provocative questions. Why Iran so attractive in supporting Qatar during Saudi diplomatic blockade in 2017?
As a matter of fact, we have tried a lot to have peace in the Middle East. Even though at the global level we have raised dialogue among civilization, that from Indonesia, Professor Shamsuddin has a center concerning dialogue and cooperation among civilizations. It means there is capacity for Indonesia, as Ibu Retno was mentioning, to have hope. The latest plan of Iran is hope, Hormuz, peaceful endeavor, which was raised by President Rouhani in the United Nations General Assembly. The main point of this plan is to have, by the whole countries of the region, to have security. Madam Champa is right that even though in Middle East the security point of view is more important than economy. As said, economy is over here in your region. So we are trying to, we say, Dr. Zarif was mentioning our foreign minister, we are not, it's not going to import security. We have to make the security by the Arab and Persian Gulf countries, Iran and Arab countries. So some of our brothers, Arab brothers, have understood such a misunderstanding. So at the start, some of our Arab countries like Oman, Kuwait, And because of the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Qatar, it has embargoed by another Arab country. So they have come to have rapprochement with Iran. So the point is, even though we have such a situation, President Rouhani at the state level, act has sent a letter one by one to the Arab countries and raised the details of this plan, that we have to have the security by our region. The point, as I said, is major power rivalry here. The strongest one is, of course, United States. During Obama administration, they tried to have dual engagement. But for a sudden, we saw that, it didn't materialize. What was the reason for that? You can find out. Israel? Or maybe you can see in Persian Gulf some attacks on ships. When there is going to have rapprochement in the region, there is, thank you, time's up. So it's very important, that for a sudden there is attacks on ships accusing Iran. Or, the point is to have the major powers' hands cut by the countries in the region. Then we will have, the hope which was mentioned by Retno. Indonesia has tried once to have moderation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but unfortunately it was not materialized by either side. But Indonesia can have a good, share in these, activities and to have peace in the Middle East. Thanks.
To His Excellency Ambassador Joe Alsun, do you still have optimism for the role of OIC to resolve the Palestinian problem?
الذي يجري ويحصل في العالم سببه القضية الفلسطينية. وأنا أقول لكم أنه إن لم يعم الاستقرار والعدل وإقامة السلام سيبقى العالم يواجه هذه الصعوبة. ولذلك الأمل موجود لدى الشعب الفلسطيني بإرادة الشعب الفلسطيني ومساندة الأحرار في العالم. العدل سيتحقق. إسرائيل إلى الزوال آجلاً أم عاجلاً. إسرائيل إلى الزوال. الشعب الفلسطيني هو صاحب هذه الأرض وهو صاحب الحق وهو الذي سينتصر. لا تتصوروا أن هذا الذي تتحدث عنه إسرائيل من الديمقراطية من العنصرية التي تعيشها إسرائيل، من العمار، من التكنولوجيا، كله زائل، لأن إرادة الشعب الفلسطيني هي التي ستحدد هذا المصير. ولذلك أقول لكم أننا متفائلون وأن النصر حتما سيتحقق لإرادة الشعب الفلسطيني.
Okay.
All right. Everything that has happened in the world today is actually caused by the Palestinian issue. So it's correct actually to say that the Palestinian issue or the Palestinian conflict is the major cause of whatever happens in the world today. So if the peace or if the justice and the stability cannot be achieved in the Palestinians, or let's say if the conflict in the Palestine cannot be solved, so conflicts and disputes all over the world will continue to happen. Israel, as the occupying power on the land of Palestine, on the land of the Palestine, soon or later will disappear. So whatever Israel is saying about democracy, about technology, about artificial intelligence, all these things will disappear soon or later. So it is the rights of the Palestinian people to decide and to consider their independence.
Okay, for Professor Dr. Din Samsudin, how to energize Indonesian foreign policy come into the middle of Middle Eastern issues?
I'm not in a position to advise.
Maybe you have
I
any
was
opinion.
a special envoy of the President for interfaith and inter-civilizational dialogue and cooperation, but I learned Indonesia has a limit to do so. I think Indonesia's foreign policy in Muslim countries in the Middle East should not be limited to sell only that we are the most populous Muslim country in the world. But I think Indonesia has to invest in those countries in terms of economy, politics, and others. But I do believe not only Indonesia, but the peace and justice loving countries like Indonesia, which have a middle path position, may well perform its mediating and moderating force in bringing peace and justice in the world. By doing so, number one, Indonesia should keep and remain in the very neutral position, no interest at all to each country, to each parties, conflicting parties. But number two, Indonesia should, perform more, not radical, more vocal, especially in the international arena, in the Security Council of the United Nations, but especially how to revitalize the OIC. I think problems within Muslim countries should be solved from within. And therefore, Indonesia maybe could invite Malaysia and certain countries, I don't know, mention no countries, to revitalize the OIC to serve as mediating and moderating force within the Muslim countries itself. And I have been observing Indonesia's foreign policy through our foreign ministers and also Indonesian diplomats have been performing that. Only we need to encourage further role. Thank you.
Okay, the last question for Dr. Champa. Do you have any explanation what if China really become new political power in the Middle East?
I think it'll be an economic power. I think it will do everything possible not to be a political power. Because frankly, I don't think it wants a headache, right? Because what they see is they look at the US and they think there are no winners here. This is billions of dollars spent over decades. And we talk about the Middle East. And we forget that the original war on terror was Afghanistan. It was in South Asia. And it's still a war that's ongoing. It's been 2 decades now. So I think they look at that, and why would you want to have that role? You know, it's not a role that looks appealing to the Chinese. But I just want to touch on the optimism point and this idea of Asian powers engaging more in the Middle East. I think we have to learn from the Western experience and do things differently. But we also have to put our own house in order, which means that if we want to resolve and mediate these conflicts and discrimination against Muslims that we're seeing in the Middle East, well, we also need to do that within Asia, whether that's the Rohingya of Myanmar, whether that's the Bengali Muslims in northeastern India. So I think it's a strange aspiration to want to have that kind of foreign policy outside of Asia, but not necessarily within Asia. But I think, when we talk about optimism, we can't just look at state to state. We have to look at the people. Because whenever change has happened, it has always come from the people. There are people on the streets of Lebanon today. There are people on the streets of Iraq. In Asia, it's happening in Hong Kong. So the danger is if you only look at state-to-state competition and rivalry, that's geopolitics. That's part of how the political system has always operated. But we must also talk about the people, right? And I think that's where we have to have faith. The people, through their action, their activism, their faith in what kind of societies and communities they want to live in, they're able to create that community for themselves. But I just want to ask people here, does anybody know what the opening words of the UN Charter are? Does anybody know what the opening words are? It says we the people. It doesn't say we the countries of the world. It doesn't say we the states. The founding document of the international community is we the people. So I think we have to talk about the people when we talk about these rivalries, because whatever happens up here, it impacts the lives of the people down here. And they are the people ultimately that will get change.
Okay, in this very limited time, I want to give chance for audience to ask one question. Please give a direct, brief, and clear questions. One. Yeah, from that side. From back, yeah, you. Yeah.
سيادة الفضيلة حضرة المحترمين أيها السفير فلسطين الإندونيسي ولجميع المتكلم في هذا المجلس. First of all, my name is Muhammad Abdul Majid Azindani and I'm student college from UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta.
Direct question, please.
Okay, my question is, wait a minute. The question is for the ambassador of Palestine to Indonesia. What are your hopes for the youth generation present in this place for the future of peace, especially in the Middle East? Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
شكرا أخي الكريم على هذا السؤال. الشعب الإندونيسي يعني حقيقة يحتضن القضية الفلسطينية. الشعب الإندونيسي أنا ما لمسته خلال السنتين، وطبعا هذا منذ التاريخ، أنه يؤيد هذه القضية لعدالة هذه القضية. نحن ما نريده منكم جميعا ومن الشعب الإندونيسي 300 مليون ومن شعوب العالم ومن أحرار العالم الوقوف إلى جانب عدالة القضية الفلسطينية، دعم هذه القضية في كافة الاتجاهات المعنوية، السياسية، المادية، الاقتصادية. هذا الموقف الذي يدعم ويساند الشعب الفلسطيني على أرضه، لأن إسرائيل تفرض الخناق على هذا الشعب وتريد إزالة الشعب عن هذه الأرض. بصمودنا ببقائنا على هذه الأرض نعطل هذا المشروع الصهيوني الذي يستهدف المنطقة قاطبة وليس فلسطين، المنطقة قاطبة. إخواني، نحن في فلسطين ندافع عن شرف وكرامة هذه الأمة، أقولها لكم بكل وضوح، عن شرف وكرامة هذه الأمة، لأن الشعب الفلسطيني هو الذي يدفع الثمن وحيدا، هو الذي يدفع الثمن وحيدا في هذا العالم. لذلك نحن نقول أن وقوفكم، مساندتكم، صمودكم معنا يقوي عزيمة هذا الشعب في التصدي للمؤامرة التي تعمل بها إسرائيل بدعم من الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. آخر قرار أعلن عنه وزير الخارجية الأمريكي وهو شرعنة الاستيطان وتأييد المستوطنين في بناء المزيد من المستوطنات وتصدير الصادرات. هذا عار من الإدارة الأمريكية أيها الإخوة. أقول لكم أننا نحارب أمريكا ونحارب إسرائيل ومن يقف معهم في هذا الخندق.
Thank you very much, my brother, for your questions. Talking about the Indonesian people, especially the Indonesian young generations, we know the Indonesian people have always supported our cause or Palestinian issue since the very beginning. Even our constitutions is supporting the Palestinian people. So therefore, we always hope for you and from the young generations of Indonesia to support and to stand with the Palestinian people in the various fields like politics, economics, social, and culture, and whatever the field. And by that, only by that, we can fight together and we can go together to in our struggle to achieve the independence of the Palestinian people. We, as the Palestinian people, are struggling for the dignity of our ummah. We struggle for the dignity of our ummah because we are, the Palestinian people, have the responsibility to ensure that this Holy Land is safe. And that's why we hope from the generation, from the young generation of Indonesia, always to be with us, to stand with us, to face all the conspiracies coming from the Israel in this Holy Land. And the latest updates from on this issue is the resolutions made by the U.S. Administration on the legalization, to legalize the settlements done by the Israel on the West Bank. So that's the new updates that.
Okay, one more question from audience. Yeah, you.
Thank you so much. I'm Deandra. I graduated from King's College London studying war.
Okay.
My question for His Excellency Ambassador of Iran. What's your take on U.S. withdrawal of the JCPOA or Iran nuclear deal? I think it will give an impact. It will impact on stability in the Middle East. Because we know the withdrawal of the U.S. Will benefit at least the U.S. and Israel, not the U.S., Saudi and Israel. So what's your take on that? And for Dr. Shampa, what do you think the China could do? Because the China is a part of the Iran nuclear deal. So thank you.
Okay.
Very good question. Because during the peace dance, it was mentioning that, Iran is going to have its nuclear activity and don't pay attention to the attendance of Iranian women to the football stadium. But the point is that Iran is a rational actor, is one of the power in the Middle East. And based on the solution that was really the motto, slogan of this gathering, SIF 2019 is win-win solution. If it is win-lose solution, zero-sum game, so nobody, it's not, as you say, a deal, fair. So they said that we are making trouble in Middle East, but we have done a big deal with the United States of America, JCPOA, based on win-win solution. It was really 12 years of negotiation, two extensive negotiation out of that 150 pages of deal with the United States. So when it's coming to, after years, coming to have the fruits of such a this JCPOA, for a sudden, Mr. Trump came out. Because, 1 year later, we can sell weapons and conventional one and other activities. We can have deal in banking system. But unfortunately, for a sudden, he's going out. I do not know. It's the question of structure or client theories. It depends on you. You can imagine. But the point is that, they are asking again to have a deal. So when one government changed to another government in the United States, it means that we have to have another deal. So it is not fair. It looks like that, as I said, in global level analysis, if you pay attention to my humble explanation was, the rise of China, the relative decline of the United States. So it is not fair to have your strong leadership, the same as before, with, to push force on political units in Middle East, and you have with China in East Asia, when you have a deal of more than $600 billion with China, and, you make trouble and to make tariff war against China. So it's not fair. It looks like that they are going to make strong their weak points by forcing Iran in Middle East, China in East Asia, is really these two important regions that we have. And for example, in case of Palestine, they call it deal of century. What does it mean? It means to give 50 billion and forget about your land. and it's not fair. It looks like that soft power will not really is a response to the political units that we have in these two regions. Although Trump administration is also pushing Europeans and Latin Americans.
Okay, Dr. Champa, the time's yours for the second questions.
So I think in terms of China's role with the JCPOA, it's complex for China. So what they've done is exercise caution, and that's for several reasons. One is the original exemptions, the waivers that were in place were soon withdrawn. So countries like India that were able to continue buying oil despite the sanctions had those waivers removed. So the pathway to still continuing to support the Iranian economy was closed down. I think the fact that the world reserve currency is in the US dollar makes it challenging for China to continue, and not just China, the EU as well, to find ways to keep the deal revived, even without the participation of the US. Because by targeting the supply chains and the third-party suppliers, you know, the risk of sanctions to Chinese companies at different points also make it challenging for China. And I think the third reason it's being cautious is because of, as you mentioned, the US-China trade dispute. So it's trying to resolve that bigger kind of, from their perspective, issue of how they engage with the US without then also trying to undermine those ongoing negotiations with the GCPOA. So I think China is trying to figure out how to work this system. But you know, the US is so dominant in terms of some of these institutions. Having the world's reserve currency means that you have power to be able to strangle certain things. So I think it's not just China, but actors are finding it hard to figure out how to keep this deal going.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are coming to end the sessions. It's very attractive discussions. And ladies and gentlemen, please give warm applause to all of our speakers. The region of Middle East actually the heart of world energy, but we found this heart is sick and full of bloody conflicts. The problem in the Middle East is actually our problem, Indonesian problem, ASEAN problem, European problem, and world problem. This is a problem of humanity that must be solved together. And we hope in the near future for a better Middle East. Thank you very much.